I am your host, Carrie Scollon, giving us different perspectives on where we are and where we want to go on our journey. Thanks for being here, and I look forward to spending some time with you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of the FoundHer series. I am your host, Carrie Scollon. I am pretty excited about the guest I have here today. I can't wait to share her with you. Her name is Dr. Jody Carrington. She is a mama of three. I think that is one of the most important things to say first. A renowned psychologist, a speaker, an author, a leader, a really just amazing person, in my opinion. She is the most real person I think I've ever come across. Authentic, I know, is a word that has been used a lot, but it just describes her, and she's hilarious. So I'm not going to wait any longer. Dr. Jody, thank you so much for being here. I cannot wait to dive into all you have and the book that was just released. So
Carrie, I'm so excited to be here. Really. We've met over a year ago. And so I was so excited to hear this project you were starting. And oh my goodness. And here we are. Going to talk on the things. Let's do it.
Here we are. Yes. So let's start with Feeling Seen. It was just released in the end of, was it January 17th? Was that the date?
January 17th. You got it.
January 17th, you're on a, well, I wouldn't say worldwide tour, but you're in the States and Canada, right? That's the start of it. Yep. And you are in Halifax right now, joining us.
Yes. Yeah, we just left Toronto a couple of days ago and then had a little stop in New Brunswick. And then now we're in Halifax tonight. Yeah. And then we fly to Vancouver tomorrow morning, as you do. You should really leave Halifax and go to Vancouver all in the same mother packing day. So it's fine. It's fine.
And when do you get to see my friend who's not really my friend, but one day I think we're going to be friends, Brad Gushu? When's that?
Brad Gushu? Yeah. Our respective boyfriend who we've talked about? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So Brad, I'm going to go try to get screeched in for the 50th time in my life. That date's in March, I think. Is it, Marty? Oh, good. Yeah. February 20th.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
So in 3 weeks, we're out in Newfoundland. So I was so excited. You know, it's interesting because, I mean, the book, as you know, is called Feeling Seen. And when we looked at, some of the places that we wanted to stop, part of what we know we can't automate ever is relationship. And so I was like, where could we go in this world that have just done such a beautiful job of making us feel seen? And I have to tell you, like, East Coasters for me have always had a piece of my heart, but there's something about Newfoundland for me. And so it is going to be ridiculously difficult to get to the Rock. And once we get there, I mean, I already can't wait. So yeah. Anyway, Brad's there, obviously, but so is fish chips dressed in gravy and a lot of good music and George drink. So
I love it. I love that you're doing this. And I totally agree with you that a book tour was absolutely necessary for this book. It is about connection. Well, actually, I like what you said. It's actually about reconnection.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started this whole process, it was always about, connection was a part of the platform. And I realized connection is the easy part. Like, we can all do this. We can wave at our neighbor. We can go on a second date. We can, buy coffee for somebody we don't know. We're so much nicer to other people's children. But reconnection is the tricky piece, right? It's like, how do you repair when shit goes sideways? And that's going to happen. Right? It's not like none of us are in a relationship where we're just blissfully happy all the time. None of us are happy about our parenting abilities. Nobody's generally always happy about the people that they've chosen to surround themselves with. So what do you do when reconnection is the issue in relationship? And the Gottmans have probably done some of the most profound research around marriage that I have read for years. And they're so interesting because they say, listen, it's not how much you fight or how much sex you have or don't have, how much money you have, that predicts the success in long-term relationship. It is your ability to repair when things don't go well. Yes. And I don't think we sort of focus on that enough with our kids or our colleagues even, is we just sort of hope everything's going to be okay. We're like, we're good. It's good. We're fine. It's fine. Oh, don't worry about it. Particularly as women, right? We have a really hard time saying like, hey, just a second, can we talk about that for a second? Or like, when you said that in front of our friends last night, like, what the fuck did you mean by that? Right. And I think sometimes when we don't do those things, that is the part of like the disconnect that perpetuates itself, right? Because we just assume, particularly if we've been in a independent role or submissive role, or, whatever the deal is, or job is just this, we're just whatever.
Yeah.
There's really no language or no ability to be like, just a second, like let's dive back into that. And so I think that reconnection piece has become the epitome, not only just to the people around you, but to yourself.
Yeah.
Because, we think, okay, now we're on a workout routine. We should be good. We did yoga yesterday. We should be good. We journaled one time in last June. It's this constant reconnection to ourselves, our values, our breath, the people who matter the most to us. That's never an end game. Right. Totally. And I think we just sort of think everybody else on our social media feeds have arrived, because we're like, holy fuck, she's drinking the collagen. And like, this one just got family pictures. Like, obviously everybody else is so much happier than nobody's happy. Everybody's assholery-ish trying to hang on. So I wish we could just normalize that a little bit more.
I totally agree. Part of that book, where you're talking about the Gottmans, I love the exercise, which before my husband left for work today, I said, I've got an exercise that we're going to do tonight when you get home. He's like, what's it going to lead to? Is it going to lead to I'm like, of course, that's what you think. Of course, that is the first thing you go to. I said, well, it could. I'm not guaranteeing anything, but it might. But that's the 4 minutes. I love how you described it in the book when you did this with your husband. It was like, his response was like, why are we doing this?
I know. So what Carrie's talking about is we often talk a little bit about how like it is so, despite the fact that we're wired for connection, from a neurophysiological perspective, we've never been this disconnected in the history of the free world. Our houses are bigger. We work remotely. Our kids are always in activities. We spend very little time face to face with the people we love and we lead. And so much of this is interesting because despite the fact that we're wired for connection, one of the hardest things we will ever do is look into the eyes of the people we love. Mm-hmm. And when I started to read that as a psychologist, that's, concerning for me. We're so disconnected. The answer is reconnection, but it's going to be so hard to do that, particularly if you don't trust people, if you have a trauma history, if you've ever been hurt by people. The ones that stand to create the most trauma in your life, the thing, if you will, is people. Mm-hmm. And it is the exact same thing that is required in healing. And so it's very difficult to say to anybody who's been hurt by a human that you can trust me in this relationship so that we can start to heal and provide corrective experiences. And so when I was reading Anand's work, he's a researcher out of Singapore. His entire platform is based around this concept of the 4 minutes of connection. And he's replicated this globally many times to really talk about how hard it is for people to sit and look at each other for 4 minutes. Yeah. And when I read this first time, I was like, how hard can it be? My personal husband and I, we've been married for 15 years. We have 3 children on the ground together. Like I'm fairly connected to him. Like how hard can it be to look at him for 3 minutes? So I went home that night and we're exact opposite in so many ways. So he's got a spreadsheet for everything. Everything's very like timed out in our world. It drives me nuts. And I just said to him, hey, hon, I was just reading this research today. Do you think we could sit down and just like look at each other for 4 minutes? And you know what he said? He said to me, why? And so then in my head, I was like, holy shit, like maybe Anand is right. This is hard. And I was like, roll up. I was like, sit down because I'm your bride. That's why you're looking at me. And so then we sit on this couch and he's like, oh my God, really? And I was like, yes. He said, well, can I time it? Oh, okay. So he gets up to stopwatch and we get set up. We start looking at each other. And so he starts to stopwatch and then he calls a timeout. Like not even within the first 5 seconds, he calls a timeout. I'm like, a timeout? What do you mean a timeout? And he said, I just have a question. He said, I want to know specifically, what am I looking for? I was like, holy shit. He was like, did you get a new haircut? Did you get he didn't want to be wrong on this activity, you see? And I was like, just look at me. And then he asked if we could take breaks. And I was like, holy Christ. I mean, we barely got divorced. I mean, we almost got divorced in this 4 minutes. And it's interesting because the replication of this research, it often happens in the first 30 seconds of looking at somebody you love. There's a lot of this. Like if you just think about trying to do this with a parent or a sibling, even a best friend, it becomes really difficult because there's you're watching how they're responding. You don't want to get too vulnerable first. There's really a dance to truly seeing another human, right? We look for cues that it's safe to step in and become more vulnerable. And if we get any of those indications that this is dumb or you're not valued in this process, okay, fine. Then let's not do it then. You're being an idiot. Huh?
Yeah.
And it's safer to retreat. And so he just sort of replicated this very many times. And if you can, sort of make it to the 1 minute mark, you start to notice some things that you haven't seen before. And if you can actually make it to, the 3.5, 4 minute mark, you tend to get emotional because so many people that we love, much of our relationship is written without words. Much of our relationship is when we slow down long enough and look at another, we remember the things that we've done together. We see the softness around their eyes that we haven't noticed for a while. We know each other's faces, quite remarkably well, but when we don't look, we sort of forget those things. Yeah. And if you do this with like a parent, for example, sometimes some of the research really fantastic because you start to notice things that you haven't seen, that they're aging or that there's things about them that, that weren't there before. And so there's a lot of emotion that gets evoked in that process. So yeah, I just think it's phenomenal.
And very uncomfortable, but very rewarding if you can get through it, right?
Yeah.
We'll see what happens tonight.
Yeah.
Let you all know what happens. So Dr. Jody, for you to do this book, which I think I pulled it up, you can see I have marked almost something in every single chapter of this book. I've highlighted, marked, I'm going to go back. Like I admitted to you, I did not finish the book before our conversation today. I didn't want to pretend that I had gotten to the end because I don't want to rush it. And that the very first part of your book, you go into some pretty deep, what would be the right word? Practices. I love how you wrap everything up at the end and give us some questions to reflect back on, to think about how it relates to us and how we can be better. And then the part that I got to was the empathy. So for you, in the short time that we have, I would love to hear your summarization and what you hoped the message would be from the book.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It was so interesting because the first book I wrote was called Kids These Days, and it's we self-published it because I'd been speaking a little bit, and the world of book publishing is really tricky. If anybody's ever written a book who listens to you, I never considered myself an author. I still don't, but I was a speaker first, and so when we started to do that across Canada, the question was, do you have a book? Do you have a book? And I was like, no, I'm never writing everything like ever again after the dissertation. I was like, I'm never writing anything again. And then basically, everything that I've been talking about on stage, we put in a book called Kids These Days. And so self-published, and it became a national bestseller. And I was like, holy shit, this is good. And so then we started to see more, and I wrote another little book for teachers called Teachers These Days. It did well. And then HarperCollins came to me and said, listen, we watched these first 2 books. Would you write a book for us? And this was during the pandemic. And I was like, oh shit, let me just check my schedule. Yes. So their request was, we really want you to speak to the state of relationships in the world. Right. And, I want you to think about a book, a more general book, like something that could be in airports and Costco, and like something that just really talks about the importance of relationship. And I said, well, I already know what it would be called. And they said, no, you can pitch the proposal next week. And I was like, no, it will be called Feeling Seen, because, this is the issue. If we're so incredibly full of love and connection and a desire to be seen by other humans, but we've never been this disconnected. And so if you want the answer to relationships, it's really allowing the people that you love and you lead to feel seen in your presence. Right. And so when we started to unpack it, I write best when I'm by myself. I love it when I'm in hotel rooms by myself. Typically Fairmonts seem to work better for me. I don't know what it is. And I'm just joking. My husband's like, for God's sake, we're on food stamps. Anyway, so I did that a little bit, and it was like interesting we generally want to just fix it. Okay. So given the mental health crisis in the world, given, we're in this sort of, I don't know, mid-pandemic that continues to sort of go on, we just want to get back to normal. We want to get back to the state of emotional regulation. But what we often miss is really unpacking all the hard parts.
Yes.
because, you can't address what you won't acknowledge. And so I knew that this book really had to be in 3 pieces. One was like all the things that are disconnecting us.
Yeah.
And it's actually the largest part of the book. It's all of this shit. So we start the book in this really hard place of like, okay, guess what? It's things like we don't have an emotional language like we used to. We are living way more farther apart than we ever have been. Let's talk about trauma and the weight of the workplace. Let's talk about racism and colonization and marginalization. Let's talk about like all of the things that rip our souls apart and the reason why we're here. Because if we don't, we're going to get into the last half of the book and people are going to be, yes, but you didn't think about. What about? So I really wanted that first part to be so like, can everybody see a little piece of themselves in terms of why it might be that they have, felt disconnected these days?
Well, I found that when I was reading it, it was like you were talking to me because I think it was on page 44 and you said, if you're looking to skip this part and get to the end with the answers in it, I was like, oh, I think she might have seen me reading this. Because that's what it was. We want to go straight to the answer. Tell me what to do. How do I fix it? And you're like, you got to stay here because this part is even more important for you if you're trying to skip it.
You do. And I was just having a conversation this morning about, emotions and our desire to get to this place of happiness. But that there actually are no bad parts. And we spend such a long time, trying to avoid anxiety or shame or the parts of us that we just really don't like, but those are so necessary to invite to the table because there are no bad parts. And when you sort of give it that space, it doesn't take on a life of its own. And then so truly the second part of the book is, coming down to the answer to it all, which for me is acknowledgement. Yes. And I just unpack what that word means to me and how Indigenous peoples in this country have taught me truly what it means to acknowledge another, and how empathy is sort of the golden thread that sort of strings all of that together. And then the last part of the book is really, I think, critical for me. It's like what happens when we get lost, not sort of if, because we're all going to mess it up again, but when. Because again, we read, I think, many self-help books that say like, okay, here's the 1, 2, 3, here's what you do, here's the ABC, but nobody says, and don't forget, you're also going to feel like shit again very soon. Okay. And so here's what you do when you fall off. So it really, when I said to our publisher, Brad, I was like, I would really love this to be a timely book that is timeless. How can we come back to it again and again and again? So there's so many people that I love. Every single one of Brené's books I've read a million times. When I think about, anybody who has a strong theoretical basis that has really influenced me over the years, like, John Bowlby or Peter Levine or Bruce Perry or any of those like really philosophical practices really allow me to sort of sink back into that again and again and again. So that's what I hope this book will do someday.
I have no doubt that it will. I also love the part of when you talk about emotional regulation. And what really fascinated me, and I know I'm going to go back and read these chapters because there's so much to digest in there. And so I just honor you for how much information you did put in a book, but in such a way that I want to read it. I want to understand. I want to learn more. That's what this book has given me. And you talk a lot to first responders. I'd love for you to touch on that, but also what really was fascinating to me in that part was we send our first responders out there, and their first initial entry, I guess, is dealing with people who are not emotionally regulated at that time. So they're coming in and they have to deal with people that are not thinking clearly, obviously, if they've come to this state. But how much training do they get on regulating their own emotions that they can deal with that? I was just like, what?
And I think that that's really interesting. In any human services profession, right? Like, teaching, this is why I love educators so much, but nurses, physicians, police officers, firefighters, the job is to serve emotionally dysregulated people, right? It is actually not to first and foremost, right? Yes, it is to put out a fire or make sure the community's safe, but you have to be exceptionally skilled at dealing with emotional regulation of people if you want to be successful and not take on everybody else's trauma. But we don't do a very good job of that. In fact, we do a really shitty job of looking after first responders in this country. And we put continually, knowingly, multiple times a shift, put them in positions where marginalized people will be extremely emotionally dysregulated. Because typically speaking, those who struggle the most with emotional regulation have had the hardest stories, because nobody's been there to walk them home to date. And so we're going to put first responders in that situation again and again and again and again and again, and do nothing to unpack those stories, which means it's going to eat them from the inside out. It's a perpetual breeding ground for racism. It's a perpetual breeding ground for burnout and emotional exhaustion and fear for your own family, which really then discombobulates your ability to stay connected to the people you love, right?
Yes.
So
yeah.
It is one of the, I think, most holiest professions. And when we've ever been at our worst, if I think about, the car accidents that I've ever been in, or, when I'm waiting for a diagnosis in a hospital, or, my mother-in-law's crashing on the table, what I need is those people desperate. I'm desperate for them to be competent in those moments. And in some of our most vulnerable emotions, we hope that those people are at their best. People, we hope the people that serve in emergency services are going to be at their best. And we do a very poor job of looking after them. And even, there's very little acknowledgement, because we don't have time. In the moment, we're like, oh my God. And then always in our head, many times, I've thought of this many times, I should go back and thank that, paramedic, or I'm going to go back to the hospital and figure out where that physician was that sort of helped us navigate these things. And we fucking never do. Rarely, barely. Anyways, I don't know about you, but I don't. The intention is great, but the perception is hard. And Gabor Mate talks about this, which I think is really interesting. He said, listen, there's no such thing as compassion fatigue, because you don't get tired of caring. What you get tired is when people stop acknowledging you for doing the work of caring for others. And I love that, because we're biologically wired for connection. But in order to keep this world turning, we are going to have to get so much better at acknowledging each other who serves us, which will require emotional regulation for us. You can't acknowledge another if you're emotionally dysregulated yourself.
Right. And do you think we're getting better? Do you think?
No, fuck no. No.
Like,
no.
Is it having?
No, we're a disaster, Carrie.
I know. That's what I think too. And I'm like, how do we do that? It's by people like you writing books like this to bring awareness to it. Yeah.
It's up to everybody who I hope reads this book, because this is not the job of a senior leader. No premier or prime minister or president is going to come out and be like, okay, here's the plan. We're going to fund this, whatever. We have to evoke the emotion and the desire of you and me, instead of all of us waiting for like somebody to serve us better. I should have married somebody else, or I wish my kids would be nicer. I got to find a better job or a better boss. Okay, you can do that. But the issue is most of us are emotionally dysregulated right now. So what is our plan? And the more you give it away, the more you get it back.
Yeah, that's very true.
So today, the call to action is always about like, what's the next best, right kind thing? Yeah. So if you give somebody a compliment today, before you go to bed tonight, that's your only job, right? Give somebody a compliment. Pick up your phone and text somebody who you love right now and say, I don't know if I tell you this enough, but you matter to me. Yeah. And just watch what happens. Yeah. People are suspicious when we're kind. Yeah. When you wave at them, they're like, what the shit's going on with her? Huh? And I send my husband a text and I'm like, I don't know if I tell you this enough, but you matter to me. And he says this to me, what'd you buy? There's no like, oh, babe, you're amazing. It's like, what is happening over there? What do you want?
I love this part also in the book where you talk about the waving. And you wave at random people just to see what their reaction is. And we have done that since the kids were little. Whenever we're leaving, especially their grandparents, like we're all in the window and we called it the crazy wave. Or if we saw them pull up the driveway and we're in the window, we're all crazy waving. But the happiness that brings by such a simple gesture is massive.
It is.
We didn't know why we were doing it. It was just fun. And we were really wanted them to know how excited we were to see them.
Yeah.
I never thought about light up other people, but
yeah, it's the light up. Like, Toni Morrison talks about this in The Bluest Eye, one of the best books in the history of the free world. And she said, that's what anybody needs, is somebody to be crazy about them. Right. Yeah. That's what they're looking for, is when they come in through the door, just like that. Yeah. The light up. And you can imagine, what happens if your partner, if you're still married, comes through the door tonight and you go, they're like, well, Me? Yeah. You're excited to see me? right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we keep waiting for somebody to do it for us. And it's true, we shouldn't be always the one to initiate it. But here's the issue: like, feeling seen is such an unsynchronized dance. Somebody has to start it.
Yeah.
And
We're
you have to
usually
make it
seen
safe.
more by our dog.
Oh, this is why everybody gets a dog. I mean,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's like, it is that unconditional stepping into that we really, really adore. And I think if you ever watch like an airport reunion, or a 2-year-old sort of like run towards a grandparent, like that's the thing. But your light up doesn't need to be crazy. You know, my light up is always over the top. But my father's light up, I talk about this all the time. My father's light up, the one who, you know, I probably want to impress most in this world. You know, he's dead in the back where, you know, I have an auditorium full of people, and, you know, I'm talking about a book I wrote or something like that. And I'll come to the back and he'll go like this to me. Proud of you, kid. And like, that's it. Like, I've arrived. You know, so it depends who does the light up as well, right? So I can get all the accolades from somebody who doesn't know me, and although that's beautiful and I love it, you know, when you get it from your people, particularly the ones that have a hard time giving it to you or haven't for a long time, you know. I was telling the story the other day about my boys, my husband and his brothers just walked their mama home. So we buried my mother-in-law a couple of weeks ago, and to watch these 3 boys, she had 3 sons, navigate each other, and they're very rough, tough farm boys. Yeah. And so they just didn't understand. It was so hard to be gentle. They didn't want this to be our truth. Yeah. And so as they started to sort of settle into her, it was so interesting. And the other day, I was with one of them in Toronto, and he said, "Okay, how's my brother doing?" And I said, "Well, he's worried about you, honey." And he said, What do you mean? He's worried about me. To watch them understand that there's a care amongst them now is just remarkable. And you should have seen that. Oh, okay. Yeah. So when we have no idea how much we mean to each other, and it's the facilitation of those relationships that sometimes can mean everything.
Yeah. And I like that you use the word dance, because I've always used kind of the word, it's a game. We're all in a game. We're playing a game. But dance just seems so much softer to me.
Yeah. Harriet Lerner wrote a number of books. Yeah. Harriet Lerner is an amazing psychologist, and she wrote The Dance of Intimacy, The Dance of Anger. And I really, you know, her work is phenomenal. Yeah. But I love that. In emotion focused therapy too, they talk about the tango, she calls it. Sue Johnson calls it a tango that couples often get into when they're trying to sort of figure out the dance. And sometimes we initiate and it's not received. So we're like, you know what, fuck you, I'm not stepping in again. And then the next time somebody else steps in and you weren't ready, or you weren't, you know, open to receive it. You know, we've all had this, like, okay, fine, I'm sorry. And you're like, oh, now you're going to apologize. How about you apologize like you mean it? And you're like, you know what, if you can't accept that apology, I'm never going to do it again. And so that's just such an example, right, of a mismatch in the dance. And so I'm going to be vulnerable in a way to sort of like put a toe in the water and just sort of see if you can receive it. And no, you slammed the door on my toe. So guess what? We're never opening that door again. And that is essentially what happens after years and years together, is that we then sort of get in this place where we stay in our separate rooms. We're in the same vicinity because we really want to be near each other, but the risk it takes to open that door. And so sometimes we do it when we're drunk. Sometimes we do it when, you know, there's a third person that can kind of like open both doors, which is PS what therapy means. And sometimes it is that sort of human in our life that sort of facilitates it. Oh my gosh, we love to spend time with, you know, whoever, because, you know, we both feel seen when we're in their presence, and we actually are nicer to each other. So it's interesting because the risk of sort of coming together sometimes is the key.
Oh, okay. I've only got 2 minutes. I'm going to just wrap up something that I read that I loved about you, that you have 2 beliefs. Well, I'm sure you've got a lot more than that, but the one is you are exactly where you need to be right now. And the other one is we're all wired for connection, and we were never meant to do this alone. Mm-hmm. I just think that's a beautiful message. It's simple, like you said. Bring it back to what we can do. And that's
next best right kind thing. You're not going to be great. We all get overwhelmed with this, like, oh my goodness, the state of the world. How are we ever going to do this? I need to start a nonprofit. I need to do this. I'm never enough. I don't have enough resources or money or letters behind my name. Jesus. Next best right kind thing. That's it.
Next best right kind thing. Expressed right kind of thing. Okay, I like that. I got to write that down. Well, you know how amazing I think you are. I appreciate you so much for coming on and sharing with us. We are hopefully going to stick around for a few questions if you have time for that. For those of you who are here, thank you so much for being here. For those of you who are going to watch the replay, I appreciate that. And Dr. Jody, I cannot thank you enough for what you're doing, the difference you're making in the world for so many of us, opening our eyes, opening our hearts. That's what we're here for. And we just need to show up, feel seen, and offer that to other people. So thank you.
Carrie. Thank you for having me.